The divorce letter rested on the silver tray, its words sharp as razors hidden under an impeccable envelope. It was a Friday night, the upmarket restaurant pulsed with hushed murmurs and the clink of wine glasses, but all this was an indistinct backdrop to the moment I had meticulously planned. I watched from a distant table, a corner where the shadows and my own pain protected me. She was there, radiant, but not for me. Her lover, sitting opposite her, laughed quietly as his gaze roamed the table as if the world revolved around the farce the two of them shared. As the waiter crossed the room with firm steps, balancing the tray, I felt my heart waver for a moment. Part of me wanted to scream, to throw the naked truth at her right then and there. Another part of me wanted to watch the theater collapse on its own. It was internal chaos, as if I were trying to contain a storm inside my chest. But none of that mattered now. The waiter stopped in front of them, lowered the tray, and in a matter of seconds, the envelope was on the table. She looked up, first confused, then alarmed. She opened the envelope slowly, perhaps feeling the weight of the moment before she even understood the contents. Her lover leaned in curiously, a smug smile on his face, until the shock spread like a stain from spilled wine. Their eyes met, but there was no longer complicity, there was fear, guilt, and something that felt like growing despair. "That's what?" Her voice failed as she tried to remain calm. The silence at the table became deafening. I got up from where I was. I walked unhurriedly, each step seeming to echo in my mind. When I reached their side, the shock on her face was a sight I'll never forget. Her lips opened to say something, but no words came out. "How dare you," muttered her lover, trying to disguise his nervousness with bravado. I ignored him, my eyes fixed on her. "I just wanted to give you something as honest as you've been with me," I replied. My tone was controlled, but each word carried the weight of a mountain. I hoped the reading was enlightening. She tried to hold my hand, but I pulled her away. There was nothing more to say there, not at that moment. The unspoken questions burned in the air between us. Why now? How did I find out? And, most importantly, what would come next? But I let these doubts remain on the threshold of their minds, the same threshold I had lived on for months. As I walked away, I heard her voice faint for the first time. "Please, can we talk?" Without looking back, I muttered just one word. "Read it." Now, outside, the night air seemed colder than before, but somehow lighter too. The weight of a betrayal is suffocating, but exposing it brings a strange release, a relief that only those who have lived through something so cruelly intimate can understand. The issue wasn't just the betrayal itself. It was what it symbolized, years of dedication, love and trust thrown to the wind. Every gesture, every smile she had offered me now seemed tainted. The lover? He was just a catalyst, a detail in a much bigger picture of choices and silent contempt. The night went on like a blur of emotions. As I drove home, the anger began to give way to something deeper, a feeling that this betrayal was just the tip of the iceberg. The look on her face at the table, the panic in her voice, there was something else, something she feared more than my reaction. And that, more than anything, hooked me on this mystery. What was she hiding beyond the obvious? What else was behind that smile that had once seemed so genuine? Now, sitting alone in the silence of our home, a single question hammered at my mind: how far had she gone to hide the truth? Welcome to our channel. Here, we never support any kind of betrayal. The stories you'll hear are fictional, created to show how betrayal can devastate lives and relationships. Each narrative brings profound lessons about trust, love and the consequences of thoughtless choices. Get ready, because what follows is an intense and shocking story, capable of holding your attention until the very last second. Good story. Lucas and Helena seem to have it all. He, a successful executive, whose presence inspired respect at meetings and parties, but who kept a sensitive side only for moments together. She, an architect with a passion for minimalist design, was known for transforming ordinary spaces into environments full of personality. Together, they were the couple that everyone admired, whether it was their complicit smiles in social media photos or the way they seemed to complete each other in silence. The apartment where they lived reflected exactly this apparent harmony. Located in the heart of the city, its neutral-toned walls were softened by personal touches, paintings chosen by Helena on business trips and books on leadership and psychology that Lucas loved to read before bed. To friends and family who visited, the home seemed like an extension of them, elegant, welcoming and stable. But behind this facade, there was a silent weight that neither of them seemed able to verbalize. Their marriage, which used to be marked by endless nights of talking and laughing, was now more about routine than passion. The connection between them, although it still existed, seemed stuck on delicate ground, where the wrong words could trigger an avalanche. On his days off, Lucas liked to go for a run. It was at these times, to the rhythm of his hurried morning steps, that he reflected on the course of his life. He thought about how everything had changed over the years. Helena used to be the center of his universe, the person with whom he couldn't wait to share every achievement. But recently, he felt like he was talking to the wind. She always listened, but her attention seemed divided, as if something or someone took up more space than he was willing to admit. Helena, on the other hand, hid her restlessness among her drawing boards and projects. Work, which had always been her passion, had become her refuge. It was easier to immerse herself in floor plans and color palettes than face the emptiness she felt at home. She loved Lucas, she was sure of that, but there were times when she wondered if it was enough. The silence that sometimes hung between them seemed louder than any fight they had ever had. That particular morning, the sun illuminated the apartment in an almost cruel way, exposing every corner and every shadow. Lucas was preparing for another day at work, while Helena was finishing an important sketch to present to a client. The breakfast table was set, but neither of them seemed hungry. Between sips of coffee, they exchanged a few words, a practical conversation about bills to pay and a charity event at the weekend. "I can pick up the wine for dinner on Saturday," Lucas suggested, trying to sound more involved than he really was. Helena nodded without lifting her eyes from the paper, the pencil firmly in her hand tracing lines that seemed clearer than her own feelings at the moment. As Lucas walked out of the door, carrying his briefcase and a forced smile to disguise his tiredness, Helena stood still for a moment, her pencil resting on the paper. The silence in the apartment seemed oppressive, as if the surrounding space was aware of the invisible tensions that they pretended didn't exist. Throughout the day, their lives followed separate but equally fraught paths. Lucas faced endless meetings, decisions that never seemed to please everyone, and a boss who always demanded more. In the midst of all this, he looked at his cell phone, hesitating. He sent Helena a message, something simple: "I hope your day is going well." Her reply, short and almost automatic, arrived a few minutes later: "Everything's fine here. Good luck in the meetings." Helena, for her part, was dealing with the chaos of an indecisive client and an inattentive intern. However, what was really distracting her wasn't her work, but the messages she wasn't sending. She thought about how distant Lucas seemed and wondered if she should try a different, more direct approach. But every time she considered starting to write something, insecurity paralyzed her. Evening came, and with it the silence that had become routine between them. Lucas came home with a slight smile, as if to give the impression that everything was fine. "I brought your favorite wine," he said, placing the bottle on the counter. Helena thanked him with a nod and started preparing dinner. It was in these moments that they both tried to regain some kind of normality, but the disconnection was evident. "You've been so busy lately," Lucas ventured, as he picked up the plates from the cupboard. The phrase sounded more like an accusation than he had intended, and Helena winced slightly. "It's just work," she replied, avoiding prolonging the subject. The next few minutes were filled with the sound of pots and pans and cutlery, while everyone took refuge in their own thoughts. Lucas wanted to say more, but feared that any wrong word could widen the chasm that already seemed unbridgeable. Helena wanted to explain her silence, but didn't even know where to begin. After dinner, while Lucas watched a documentary on the sofa, Helena returned to her desk, immersed in another project. The two of them were there, in the same house, but it was as if they were miles apart. Despite this, there were still moments of tenderness between them. A quick touch of the hand as they passed each other in the hallway, a shy smile when their occasional jokes broke the tension, or the simple fact of lying in the same bed, even if on opposite sides. Small gestures that reminded them both that something still existed there, even if it was slowly falling apart. What neither of them knew was that the apparently solid structure that supported their marriage was about to be shaken. The calm surface hid deep fissures, and something, or someone, was already beginning to exploit these vulnerabilities. That night, as Helena switched off the desk light and Lucas adjusted his pillow for the third time, the future seemed more uncertain than ever. Each of them carried secrets, doubts and fears that they didn't have the courage to share. But time, relentless as ever, would ensure that the truths would come out, whether they were ready or not. The sound of the rain against the windows echoed in the silent apartment. Helena had just left for an important meeting, and Lucas remained seated at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee cooling in front of him. He tried to concentrate on the reports he had brought from the office, but his mind was elsewhere. Something about Helena's behavior over the last few months had disturbed him in an almost obsessive way. It wasn't just the distance between them, but small gestures and details that he had begun to notice, messages that she deleted too quickly, calls that ended suddenly as soon as he entered the room, frequent excuses about working late. Deep down, he wondered if he was exaggerating. Perhaps it was the weight of the job, the natural wear and tear of years together. But there was something else. A kind of visceral intuition that he couldn't shake. He remembered the day she came home with a different perfume, an unusual scent. He asked her about it casually, and she said it was a present from a friend at work. The answer seemed plausible, but he couldn't forget her expression at that moment, something between discomfort and a rush to change the subject. Over the next few days, Lucas began to pay even more attention. He wasn't a jealous man by nature, but the feeling that something was out of his control made him anxious. He watched her schedule, the subtle changes in her routine. At first, he felt guilty for being suspicious. But that guilt soon gave way to a grim determination. If there was something wrong, he had to find out. One evening, while Helena was in the shower, Lucas decided to do something he had never imagined. He picked up her cell phone, which was on the bedside table. The device was locked, and he hesitated for a moment, wondering if he really wanted to go through with it. His breathing was heavy, and he almost put the phone back. But then the screen lit up briefly, and a message notification appeared. The name on the message was unfamiliar, and the content was brief, "Looking forward to seeing you tomorrow." Lucas felt his blood run cold. There was nothing explicit in the message, but the context was enough to set his heart racing. He put his cell phone back and tried to act naturally when Helena got out of the shower. But that night, while she slept next to him, he lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling and trying to organize his thoughts. Over the next few days, Lucas began to put the pieces together. He secretly took a cab to follow her on one of the nights she said she had a work meeting. He felt ridiculous, almost paranoid, but he couldn't help it. He followed her car to a restaurant he recognized. She went in, alone, but a few minutes later, a man appeared and sat down at her table. Lucas watched from inside the cab, from a safe distance. The way they talked, the closeness between them, everything pointed to something he didn't want to admit. When she came home later that evening, he was on the sofa, pretending to watch a movie. She seemed calm, as if nothing had happened. She smiled as she passed him and said she was tired, going straight to her room. Lucas watched her disappear down the corridor, feeling a mixture of anger and pain that almost made him scream. Over the next few days, he began to plan his approach. He didn't want to confront her without concrete proof. If there was something going on, he needed certainty before making any decisions. He began to gather evidence discreetly, recording the times she went out, photographing the car parked at the restaurant, and even hiring a private investigator to confirm his suspicions. The weeks that followed were a test of emotional endurance. Lucas tried to maintain a semblance of normality while his mind was consumed by the possibilities. Helena, on the other hand, seemed increasingly distant, as if she too was struggling with something she couldn't share. The nights at home became unbearably silent, everyone trapped in their own thoughts. Then came the day when Lucas received the photos and the investigator's report. The envelope was on the living room table when he got home from work. He opened it with trembling hands, feeling a crushing weight on his chest. The images showed Helena and the man he had seen in the restaurant, sitting together on several occasions, walking hand in hand in a park, and entering a hotel together. The confirmation of what he had already feared brought a mixture of relief and despair. He spent hours looking at those photos, trying to absorb what they meant. Memories of happy times with Helena surfaced in his mind, colliding violently with the reality he was now facing. He wondered what had gone wrong, where he had failed. But deep down, he knew it wasn't just his fault. The weight of his choices could not be ignored, but the fact that she had crossed that line was something he could not easily forgive. That night, Lucas couldn't sleep. His mind was racing with thoughts of what to do next. He decided that he needed to confront her, but he wanted to do it in a way that made it clear how much it had hurt him. He didn't want to shout or fight. He wanted her to feel the weight of his actions as directly as possible. The next morning, while she was at work, Lucas prepared everything. He wrote a clear and direct letter, explaining that he knew everything and that there was no turning back. He folded the letter carefully, put it in an envelope, and went to the restaurant where he knew she would meet her lover that evening. When the moment arrived, Lucas was sitting at a discreet table, watching as she entered and sat down at the table with the man. The waiter, instructed by him beforehand, approached with the letter. Helena's reaction was immediate, a mixture of shock and panic took over her face. Lucas, from his table, watched in silence, feeling a strange calm as he saw her mask crumble. She opened the envelope and began to read. Her face paled and her hands trembled. Her lover looked at her with concern, but Lucas paid no attention to him. His focus was on her, on the woman he thought he knew. As Helena looked around the room for him, Lucas got up and left, leaving her to face the consequences of her choices alone. The room was completely silent, except for the muffled sound of strained breathing. Helena was sitting on the sofa, her hands folded in her lap. Her posture was rigid, as if her whole body was carrying the weight of the last few hours. Lucas, standing by the window, stared into the void, his hands clenching the sill as the tension vibrated in the air like a thread about to snap. "You could at least say something," she finally said, her voice low and brittle. "I know I made a mistake, but standing here, torturing myself with silence." Lucas turned slowly, his eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her cringe. "Say something. What exactly do you want me to say, Helena? That I understand. That I accept. Because, honestly, I don't even know where to start." She swallowed, trying to find the right words, but everything that came to mind seemed insufficient. "It's not as simple as it sounds. It's not something I can justify with one sentence or one reason." "Ah, so now I'm the one who doesn't understand, is that it?" He crossed his arms, his voice taking on a sharp edge. "Because, to me, it seems quite simple. You lied, you betrayed me, and now you want me to understand. But do you understand what you've done to me? With us?" Helena lowered her head, Lucas' words hitting her like blows. She knew he was right, but there was a truth she still didn't have the courage to tell him. A truth that could change everything, for the worse or for the better, but that certainly wouldn't leave anything the same. I needed something different," she began, hesitantly. "It's not that I don't love you, Lucas. I do. But things have become so predictable. I got lost in it all." He laughed bitterly, shaking his head. "Predictable. So that's your justification?" "Because I thought predictability was what we call stability, something we strive for together. But apparently you needed emotion. And where do I come into this?" Was I discarded because I was too stable? It wasn't like that. Her voice rose, laden with despair. I was confused. I didn't know how to deal with everything. The job, the two of us, the emptiness I felt, emptiness. He took a step forward, his eyes shining with frustration. And the solution to that emptiness was to stab me in the back. Did that fill anything for you? Helena stood up, finally finding the strength to face him. You don't understand what I was going through. I felt invisible, Lucas. It was like I was alone, even when you were by my side. And you think I didn't notice, he retorted, his voice lower but still full of pain. I felt your distance, Helena. I tried to get closer, but you always put up barriers. And now you're telling me that the solution is to seek comfort in someone else. Silence fell over them again, heavy and unbearable. Lucas breathed deeply, trying to control the anger and hurt that pulsed inside him. Helena closed her eyes, feeling the tears run down her face, but she knew that crying wouldn't change anything. It was now or never. I didn't want you to know like this, she said, her voice almost a whisper. But since we're here, I need to tell you something. Lucas frowned, his expression hardening. Anything else, Helena? Because I don't think I can handle anything else today. It's about the man, she hesitated, searching for the words. He's not just someone I met by chance. It wasn't an accident. Then what? Lucas crossed his arms, waiting for her to continue. Helena took a deep breath, as if she was about to jump off a cliff. He was my client. And I knew that accepting that project could complicate everything, but I did it anyway. At first, it was just work, but then, Lucas interrupted, his expression becoming increasingly grim. You mixed work and that? My God, Helena. How far did that go? I don't know how to explain it, she muttered, the words coming out slurred. He took advantage of my insecurities, my doubts. And before I knew it, I was already involved. Lucas took a step back, as if he needed space to process everything. You allowed someone to infiltrate our lives, our spaces. You lied to me all these months, and now you want me to believe it was a mistake you couldn't control. Helena clenched her hands, fighting the urge to defend herself. She knew that any justification would just sound like another excuse. I don't expect you to forgive me. But I needed you to know. He means nothing to me. Not anymore. What about me? Lucas asked, his voice breaking for the first time. Do I still mean anything to you? Because, honestly, I don't know where I am in this story anymore. Helena tried to move closer, but he took a step back, keeping his distance. Lucas, I know I've hurt you in a way that may never be repaired. But I want you to know that, despite everything, my feelings for you have never changed. He laughed bitterly, his eyes shining with a mixture of anger and sadness. You say that now, after destroying everything. But you know what's worse, Helena? It's not just what you've done. It's what it says about both of us, about everything we've built. Was it all a lie? She shook her head in despair. No, it never was. Everything we experienced, every moment, was real. I just made a terrible mistake. Lucas stared at her for a few more seconds before looking away. I need some time. I need to think. Without waiting for an answer, he turned and left the room, leaving Helena alone with the weight of her choices. She knew that the worst was yet to come, but she also knew that this was the first step towards facing the consequences of what she had done. Lucas drove aimlessly through the city streets. The night seemed darker than usual, and the streetlights cast shadows that danced on the hood of the car. His mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, each one more painful than the last. He needed answers, but he also feared finding them. The silence of the vehicle contrasted with the storm roaring inside. He pulled into an almost empty parking lot, parked, and for a moment just stood there, his hand still gripping the steering wheel, his fingers squeezing hard as if they could contain what he was feeling. Across town, Helena was sitting on the edge of her bed. The apartment seemed too big, too empty without Lucas. His words echoed in her mind, each sentence cutting like a knife. She knew she couldn't change the past, but she also knew she had to be honest if she wanted to salvage anything that remained between them. She picked up her cell phone and began to type a message to him, but every word seemed wrong, insufficient. She deleted the text and sighed, dropping the phone next to her. Hours later, Lucas returned home. The creak of the door opening echoed through the apartment, alerting Helena, who was sitting on the sofa with a cup of cold tea in her hands. She stood up slowly, watching him enter with slow steps, as if he were carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. He didn't look at her directly, leaving his jacket on the chair and heading for the kitchen. She followed him, hesitating, her heart racing. "You're back," she said, breaking the silence. Her voice was low, almost a whisper. "I had nowhere else to go," he replied emotionlessly, opening the fridge to get a bottle of water. "But that doesn't mean I'm ready to talk." "I understand," she said quickly, trying to hold back tears. "But I need to tell you something. Something I haven't had the courage to do before." He finally faced her, his eyes heavy with exhaustion. "Something else? After everything that's already been said, what else is there, Helena?" She took a deep breath, her hands shaking slightly. "I should have told you from the beginning. But I didn't know how. I was afraid that you would hate me even more." Lucas crossed his arms, waiting. "Go ahead. There's nothing left to lose, right?" Helena leaned on the bench, trying to find stability in the words she was about to say. "The man I got involved with, it wasn't just a mistake. He approached me with a specific intention. He knew who you were, Lucas." He frowned, confused. "What are you saying?" "He wasn't just any client," she continued, her voice shaking. "He knew about your work, about the sale of the company. He wanted information. He used our connection to do it." Lucas blinked, incredulous. "Are you saying that he used you to get to me? That this was all some kind of plan?" Helena nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I didn't realize it at first. I thought it was a coincidence, that it was just a genuine interest. But after a while, he started asking questions. About you, about your contracts. That's when I realized he was trying to manipulate the situation. And yet you carried on." Lucas' voice rose, charged with indignation. "You knew and you let it happen. You put my life, my career, everything we've built, at risk because of it." "I stopped as soon as I understood," she replied quickly, trying to justify it. "I cut off contact, Lucas. I said I didn't want to see him anymore. But he didn't take it well. He started threatening me. So now you're the victim." He shook his head in disbelief. "That's unbelievable, Helena. Absolutely unbelievable." "I'm not saying I'm innocent," she pleaded, her hands raised in a gesture of supplication. "I was wrong, yes. But he knew how to play me, how to use my weaknesses. When I wanted to leave, he started saying that he would tell you everything, that he would expose every detail." Lucas laughed humorlessly, running his hand through his hair. "Well, here we are. Exposed. You knew it could happen, but you still went ahead." She moved closer, but he took a step back, keeping his distance. "I didn't know what to do," she continued, her voice breaking. "But now you know everything. I don't want to hide anything anymore. I just want to fix it, if that's even possible." "Fix it?" He stared at her in disbelief. "You think this is something that can be fixed? After everything? After you betrayed me, after exposing me to someone who clearly had ulterior motives? I don't even know where to start, Helena." She lowered her head, feeling the weight of his words. I didn't want to lose you. But you already have," he replied, his voice lower but no less firm. Maybe it won't be forever, but right now, at this moment, I can't imagine how we can get over it. The silence between them was deafening. Lucas picked up his jacket again, hinting that he was going out again. "Where are you going?" Helena asked, her voice laden with despair. "I don't know," he replied, without looking back. "All I know is that I need to breathe." He left, leaving Helena alone in the kitchen, silent tears streaming down her face. She knew that the road to reconciliation, if there was one, would be long and painful. But, for the first time in months, she felt she had done what needed to be done, told the truth. As Lucas walked through the streets, the cold wind cut across his face, but it wasn't enough to calm the rage inside him. He needed time, he needed to process everything he had heard. But above all, he needed to decide what he would do next. Lucas walked through the almost deserted streets, the sound of his footsteps echoing in the stillness of the night. The cold cut into his skin, but he hardly noticed. He was absorbed in his own thoughts, trying to unravel the tangle of emotions that intertwined in his mind. Anger, disappointment, sadness, and even a twinge of guilt, even if he didn't want to admit it. Helena's revelation had not only destroyed the trust between them, it had brought to light a dilemma he had never imagined he would face. There was much more at stake than just marriage. He sat down on a nearby park bench, the wind blowing hard and rustling the leaves around him. He reached into his pocket for his cell phone, hesitating for a moment before dialing his lawyer's number. He knew this call was inevitable. What Helena had told him meant that his financial and professional security was at risk. He needed to act quickly, but the weight of this decision seemed overwhelming. After a few rings, the lawyer's sleepy voice answered. "Lucas? Is everything all right?" "No," he replied, his voice deep. "I need to talk to you. It's about Helena. There's something more serious than I thought." On the other end of the line, the lawyer listened patiently as Lucas explained, without going into unnecessary personal detail, what he had discovered about Helena's lover. The line was silent for a few seconds before the lawyer answered. "Lucas, this is serious. If he's obtained confidential information, it could be considered corporate espionage. We need to act immediately, but also be careful. We need concrete proof that he used this information." "Has Helena said anything about what he might have done with the data?" "No," Lucas admitted. "All I know is that he was after them, but I'm not sure what he got. I'll start working on it now. I need you to collect anything that can help us. Messages, emails, any evidence. And, Lucas, this could go beyond you and Helena. It could involve your company. Be discreet." Lucas hung up, feeling a knot tighten even more in his stomach. He knew that this was far from being resolved. He stood up from the bench, his mind spinning with possibilities. Meanwhile, Helena was at home, wrestling with her own demons. She had spent hours sitting in the same place, unable to move, as if her guilt kept her paralyzed. She thought of Lucas' words, the pain in his voice, and knew he was right. Everything she had done up to that point had only made matters worse. Now, the damage wasn't just emotional, there was a real risk to Lucas' professional and personal life. She needed to find a way to repair what she had done, but, try as she might, she didn't know where to start. Her cell phone vibrated on the table, a familiar name lighting up the screen. Her lover, the man who was now the source of her shame and regret, was trying to get in touch again. Her initial impulse to ignore the call was interrupted by a darker thought: she had to face him. She picked up, her voice low and tense. "What do you want?" "Helena," his voice sounded calm, but loaded with a smugness that made her shudder. "We need to talk. You know you can't just erase me from your life as if nothing had happened." "There's nothing more to say," she replied, trying to remain firm. "What you did was wrong. I'm not going to help you with anything else." He laughed softly, a sound that made her blood run cold. "Me? Wrong? Let's remember who it was that opened the doors for me. You knew what you were doing, Helena. Now, if you don't want things to get any more complicated, I suggest you meet me tomorrow. We need to resolve this, amicably. She felt the weight of the threat implicit in his words. He still had some kind of power over her, and, worse, over Lucas. Her mind spun as she considered her options. Facing him was dangerous, but ignoring him could be even worse. She hung up without answering, but she already knew she had to go to the meeting. The next morning, Lucas returned home early, exhausted after a sleepless night, but with a new determination. He didn't want to face Helena, but he knew he had to. He found her in the kitchen, sitting at the table with an untouched cup of coffee in front of her. She looked up when he entered, and for a moment, neither of them said anything. I spoke to my lawyer, he began, bluntly. This isn't just about you and me anymore, Helena. This could turn into a much bigger problem. She nodded, her face pale. I know. And I'm going to fix it. How? He crossed his arms, incredulity evident in his voice. How do you intend to fix something like this? Do you realize the extent of the damage? Helena lowered her gaze, her voice almost a whisper. I'm going to talk to him. Make him stop. He called me yesterday. What? Lucas's voice rose, full of indignation. Are you still in contact with him? That's not it. She quickly defended herself. He threatened me, Lucas. He said he had to find me. And, yes, I will. Because if it can stop him from doing something worse, I will. Lucas ran a hand through his hair, struggling to stay calm. That's a terrible idea, Helena. You don't know what he's capable of. Do you? She looked up, the challenge in her voice surprising them both. I was the only one who really knew him. I know he's manipulative, but I also know I can stand up to him. Lucas was silent for a moment, his gaze fixed on her. Finally, he sighed. If you're going to do this, you're not going to do it alone. Helena blinked, surprised. What do you mean? I'm going with you. I won't let you face it alone, even if I hate every second of it. The two spent the rest of the day in silence, mentally preparing for the meeting. When the time came, they set off together, the tension between them almost palpable. They arrived at the agreed place, a discreet cafe on a quiet street. The man was already there, sitting at a table at the back, a confident smile on his face when he saw them. Well, he said, as Lucas and Helena approached. What a pleasant surprise. Lucas didn't reply, he just sat down next to Helena, his eyes fixed on the man in front of him. Helena was the first to speak. Say what you have to say and get it over with. The man's smile widened. Ah, Helena, always so direct. But I think you know that things aren't that simple. I just want what's fair. Fair. Lucas finally spoke, his voice cold. Do you think this is about justice? The man stared at him, his smile fading slightly. I have nothing against you, Lucas. This is just business. Business that involves destroying lives, Lucas retorted. You played dirty, and now you want to walk away as if nothing happened. I just want what I was promised, he said, turning his gaze to Helena. You know what I mean. Lucas frowned, confused, and looked at Helena, who avoided his gaze. What's he talking about? Helena took a deep breath, fighting back the shame. He wants money. He said that if I didn't cooperate, he'd use what he knows against you. Lucas felt his anger rising again, but forced himself to remain calm. He knew he had to play it smart. If you think you're going to get anything out of this, you're wrong. We're already taking legal action. The man laughed, leaning forward. Good luck with that. But by then, maybe I'll have gotten what I want. The silence that followed was dense, each man assessing his next steps. Lucas knew that this battle was far from over, but one thing was certain: he wasn't going to back down. Not for Helena, not for himself. Lucas was standing in his lawyer's meeting room, his eyes fixed on the clock that was ticking away the minutes. The last few days had been an emotional and legal marathon. He and Helena hadn't exchanged many words since their meeting in the cafe. She had gone back to her apartment, but the distance between them was now insurmountable. They each knew that they were at a point of no return, but they also knew that they still had to face the consequences together. "He's accepted the offer," said the lawyer, interrupting Lucas' thoughts. The news was a small victory in the midst of chaos. After a lot of pressure, Helena's lover, who had tried to blackmail them, finally gave in when he realized that there was no way he could back up his threats without seriously incriminating himself. With Lucas' legal support, the investigation into the man's illegal activities gained momentum, and he was forced to abandon any attempt at extortion. Lucas sighed, relieved, but the weight on his chest remained. This battle was won, but what came next was something that no legal strategy could solve. He left the office and walked the streets for a while, trying to process everything. The sky was overcast, reflecting the state of his mind. He knew he needed to make a definitive decision about his marriage. When he arrived at the apartment, he found Helena sitting on the sofa, holding a cup of tea that had already gone cold. She looked at him with a mixture of expectation and resignation, as if she knew that this would be the last conversation between them. Lucas closed the door slowly, letting the silence hang for a few moments before speaking. He gave in, he began, his voice calm but emotionless. "He won't threaten us anymore. It's done." Helena nodded, trying to absorb the news. I don't even know how to thank you." "It wasn't for you," he said quickly, his tone firm. "It was for me. For the people around me who could be harmed. And, in a way, for both of us, so that we can put an end to this." She lowered her gaze, knowing what was coming next. "Lucas, I know I've done more wrong than I can express. I know that words won't fix anything. But I want you to know that, despite everything, I never stopped loving you." He sighed deeply, taking a seat in a nearby armchair. "Maybe that's the problem, Helena. You loved, but you didn't know how to protect it. You didn't know how to protect us. And now, I don't know if I can look at you anymore without remembering everything that happened." "I'd do anything to make it right," she whispered, her silent tears flowing. "I know," he replied. "And, in a way, that only makes it harder. Because part of me wishes it were different. I wish I could just forget. But I can't. I need to move on, Helena. And I think you do too." The silence that followed was like a final blow. Helena knew he was right, but hearing those words was devastating. Lucas stood up and walked to the door. "I'm going to spend some time away," he said. "I've already spoken to my lawyer about the divorce. It's going to be amicable. I don't want to fight about anything, Helena. I just want peace." She didn't answer, she just nodded, knowing that there was nothing more to say. Lucas left, and as the door closed, Helena felt the full weight of her choices come crashing down on her. Over the next few weeks, Lucas began to rebuild his life. He rented a small apartment and immersed himself in work. Despite the pain, he found a strange relief in starting again. One day, while walking through a park, he came across a woman reading on a bench. It was a simple scene, but something about it caught his attention. They ended up chatting by chance and, for the first time in a long time, he felt a glimmer of lightness. Helena, on the other hand, plunged into work to avoid facing the emptiness that now filled her life. She sought therapy, trying to understand the patterns that had led her to destroy what she valued most. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but she was determined not to repeat the same mistakes in the future. The apartment she and Lucas had once shared became a silent space, a constant reminder of what she had lost. Her lover, now facing legal investigations, had lost his job and his credibility. His selfish and calculating actions took their toll, leaving him isolated and without allies. He tried to get his life back on track, but the damage was too deep to be repaired easily. Months later, Lucas was walking through an art gallery, something he had never done before. The woman he had met in the park was by his side, and he realized that, despite everything, he had found a new chance at happiness. It wasn't something planned or forced, it was just life moving on, the way it was meant to be. Helena, at a different exhibition, was looking at an abstract painting, lost in her thoughts. She was alone, but for the first time in a long time, she felt a strange peace. She knew she still had a long way to go, but she was willing to walk every step of the way. Their story, full of pain, learning and rebuilding, didn't have an easy ending, but it had a necessary one. It was a reminder that choices have consequences, but also that life offers second chances, even if they are completely different from the ones we imagine. Now it's up to you. What did you think of this story? Leave a comment, we want to know what you think. And if you like it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more impactful stories like this one. Remember, we don't support any kind of betrayal here. See you next time.